Welcome, everybody, to Gen Y Jazz. This is my quarantine era project to learn from my friends, the great jazz players of our time. And Sasha is precisely one of those. She is one of a handful of musicians who has played on both my senior and master's recitals. But in spite of that, she has some lesser accomplishments, including playing with Nicholas Payton, Tyshawn Sorey, releasing her own record. She's a Marimba One artist and a Vader Drumsticks artist. So we're going to have a lot to talk about today. She's a blogger. And maybe to get started, how the heck are you, SB?
I'm doing okay these days, hanging in. I've been doing a lot of teaching and I'm getting this second album ready, so I'm pretty excited about that. Um, I don't know. I'm on the West Coast right now visiting my parents, but that's pretty much the vibe.
Well, that's great. And I didn't realize you were teaching, so maybe we can spend some time talking about that because one of my uh, reasons for doing this is to serve as a resource for not only our peers but my students,
Yeah.
and I kind of am hoping to grow as a teacher through this. So maybe we can spend a little bit of time talking about that. But maybe before we get into all that, sounds like your COVID year, has been okay. Like you've had stuff to do, unlike many. So do you want to talk about that for a quick second? What has the last year looked like in addition to teaching and putting the album together? Have you been able to play out at all?
Yeah, here and there. So the Palladium Wayne Shorter project is still a thing. So we've been able to play a couple of gigs here and there. We just did a live at Emmett's Place series that went over really well. That was a lot of fun. We play sometimes at Smalls or Bar Bayou, or, sort of wherever venues, are hosting shows basically.
Right.
Um, and where places can get sort of sponsors to fund the concerts because otherwise it's hard to open up even at partial capacity. I think a lot of venues are running into that issue.
Right.
So there's that, and I have done some remote recording projects as well as I did record my second album in December. Hopefully that'll come out at the end of 2021 or beginning of 2022. I think the idea is that I want to tour with the music and we need gigs to come back by that point. So
Yeah.
we're sort of waiting it out, seeing how things change this summer or in the fall. Um, Kind of dependent on that, but definitely we'll release one or two singles. I think before the full album comes out.
Oh,
At
good.
least that's my goal. Yeah, I mean it's not really up to me; it's up to the label, but I think we will be able to do that. And yeah, and I've been doing quite a bit of teaching. I was in LA for about 9 months, um, teaching down there and playing and doing some recording and stuff like that. But that was really at the beginning of the pandemic, uh,
Oh,
like last March. Yeah. So
interesting.
yeah, and that was great, and the weather's really nice. But I definitely miss New York, and that's like where my people are at and where my like main scene is at. So I came back, and yeah, so I've been teaching. I taught at Mallet Lab over the summer. I've been giving private lessons, uh, you know, since before last March, but definitely, more concentrated now that I'm out of school and I have time for those things. And, while we don't have, the gig roster that we normally do, I'm able to fill that time with teaching. So that's nice. And it's been great. Yeah.
And you're teaching as far as the private students. Have they all been vibraphonists?
No. So I am getting quite a couple of students who are like marimbas, who are classical marimbas, looking to start on jazz and looking to start on
Nice.
vibraphone in particular. So that's
Nice.
been kind of interesting. But I I have like two guitar students and one. I had one student who was a pianist, so I was teaching him jazz piano, and then the guitar students I was teaching like composition and harmony stuff. So sort of general. theory, and I'm trying to apply it to them, to guitarists, to try and make it more relevant to what they do and not speak in like vibraphone specific terms.
Sure,
I
sure.
think that's more by chance from them listening to my compositions and wanting to know more about my process. That's really what we talk about in those lessons. But yes, but I do have majority are vibraphone focused students for vibraphone performance, sort of jazz based, and then the other bit is mostly like composition stuff, which is really cool. And I actually am less experienced with teaching composition than I am with vibraphone performance, so it's a good challenge for me as a teacher. Um, yeah, but I'm also like giving some master classes. I just did a master class yesterday for MSU Denver. That was a lot of fun. The
Oh,
students were very enthusiastic, and hopefully we'll continue. Yeah, I don't know. It's just sort of up to. I know a lot of schools are losing funding right now, so that's been an issue.
right.
But hopefully I'll get to do more of that. Mm,
Yeah, well, so I'm curious, on the master class you just did, for example.
yeah,
Has that been a distance learning technology kind of like you're obviously in California, so it must have been something like that, Sound Jack or
yeah,
Zoom or something.
yeah. We did
Um,
like a big Zoom meeting basically, and then they spotlight me while I speak, and I share some recordings and I talk and stuff like that.
and did they ask you were you, I don't know, contracted, I guess, to speak about a specific subject, or did they just say we want Sasha Berliner and then you show up and take Q&A or talk about whatever you want? What was the process there?
It was sort of something in between because I was just discussing with the head of the program like what would be a good thing to teach the students. And I think initially I was talking about teaching like stuff on harmony stuff because that's like something that has deeply influenced me, as I'm sure it has you and a number of people. And I have my own sort of take and twist on it as well. So that was sort of the idea that I would be more honed in on this like jazz sort of jazz harmony, but ultimately I would say it's not exclusive to jazz. It's just
Right.
speaking about harmony in general. And getting in touch with emotional associations with harmony and getting more specific about that. Anyways, um, but the teacher said, this is a university that isn't music centric. It's not like MSM or it's not like Juilliard or I don't know. I mean, Juilliard has many focuses, as does MSM, but um, it's sort of like that, and the students there are not all necessarily wanting to become jazz musicians. They might be in the jazz program, but it may be because they want it to inform some other genre of music that they're
Right.
interested in, or something like that. A lot of people from the new school were sort of in a similar boat, even though jazz theory, harmony, and stuff is like fundamental curriculum. That there are a lot of people from New School who went on to do things that aren't really in the jazz realm, and you rather using the jazz as a means of informing, what they did want to do. So um, she was like maybe something that would apply more to these students or something that's less. She sort of said like less, jazz specific and less like I don't know, less jazz curriculum-y, I guess. And I
Yeah.
was like, yeah, okay, that's fine. Well, I told her this isn't like I can talk about a master class that isn't like your conventional sort of master class, and it may not feel like quite as like structured as like a theoretical curriculum or something like that. But I said, well, I can just talk to them about, how do you make your own voice stand out in today's world? What are the particular struggles that we, deal with in, contemporary music, the contemporary music industry, whether it's like social media, whether it's, losing money to streaming services, whether it's the idea of genreless creation, or how do we just unleash our creativity without getting too bogged down in our heads about, oh, we're not good enough, or we're missing this or that thing, and that kind of stuff that hinders our creative urges in the first place. um, Talking about a lot of that stuff, and then I talk about how do I sort of flip or change, um, you know a lot of aspects of traditional jazz and put that into my own music or into my own arrangements. So I did reference some recordings where I said, "Oh, this is an original Wayne Shorter song," or "This is an original standard that I did something very different with because I had trouble emotionally relating to the original song, not the Wayne song, but the standard
Right.
in question." And I said, but I came across this idea to just add a variation on the bridge of this song, and then I decided, then it just sort of came naturally that I was going to do a variation on this song. And I, and that's basically how this arrangement was birthed. And, that kind of stuff is, what I feel like the jazz industry gravitates to right now. I mean, not saying that you should accommodate for that exactly, but I think people like to hear something that has existed in the tradition, but but represented in a way that surprises them, or in a way that they haven't heard before. Or so I also talked about like my use of pedals with the vibraphone, or just certain reharmonization that is outside of the realm of like conventional jazz harmony. Like there's like the example of I don't know why I thought about this all of a sudden. There's like that major seven chord in the Stefan harmony series that has it's T7, right? So you
Mm-hmm.
say we're in C major and you omit the five, right? And then the basis of the chord, and you have a B major triad on C major. Like conventional jazz harmonies can tell you can't put a sharp nine on a major chord, but Stefan's like there's a way you can identify all the intervals and sort of cross relate them to the sharp nine, and technically nothing clashes if you don't have the five in there. So it works, and it creates this really interesting harmony. And yet you're not going to get a jazz curriculum that's going to affirm that sort of perspective, and
Right.
sort of using that as a metaphor in the sense of like the jazz school is not going to give you all the answers, and it's going to oftentimes it does try to put you into a box, or it does try to say there's one way of approaching the music and there's not. And so that was sort of loosely what the master class was based on, and just how do we find our own voice today and our own relevance, and get in touch with what we're about and what our own gifts are, and how to take advantage of that. So yeah.
That's really cool. And you said a few things I want to respond to, but the first one, based on what you just brought up with harmony, that I think you'll have some strong feelings about is the fact that harmony is typically taught from a piano centric way. And I think it's fair to say that Stefan's system does this. But the nomenclature of T7, triad built on the seven, when you start thinking in these terms, especially for us as non pianists, right? We might have a four note voicing or a two note voicing or something. Suddenly, T7 can apply not only in a major context, but in a million different contexts. You just have to kind of be open to it. And you mentioned helping students, bring out their own artistic voice. Obviously, you're someone who thinks in artistic terms, not just technical terms. And so maybe the question there is with regard to harmony or arranging or any kind of conventional, so to speak, jazz concept. How would you, Sasha Berliner, approach any of those things in a way that is personal? And how would you advise someone to do the same?
Yeah, well, I think there's a huge aspect of intuition, which is kind of like when I tell my students that, they're kind of like, okay, like what do I what do I do with that? Because there's no way to be like, here's how you get in touch with your intuition. You can't just give like a series of steps, or an order of things to do, and just have them be like, okay, it's like a skill that you can just acquire by learning the steps. It's more just something you feel, right? That's what intuition is. But I talk about that as being like a huge part of getting in touch with like, you know, your inner gut, your inner feeling, what you know to be true to you or not. And in general, just talking about, I mentioned a huge thing where I said, identify artists you like and why. And it doesn't have to be related to genre, It doesn't have to be related to a conventional catalog that a lot of people may push you towards in jazz school or otherwise, but just, identify what artists you like and why. And oftentimes, like for me, I've found a lot of my favorite artists span a number of genres, a number of influences, but they may share certain things in common across the board. And there's certainly certain things that I identify with in all of these artists that I really like, and yet no one would think to lump them together because they're separated by something like genre or orchestration or presentation. Like one may be a full blown classical orchestra, and one may be like an experimental electronics project, or one may be like, I don't know, someone like Radiohead, who I've been super influenced by for a long time since I was a kid. And Johnny Greenwood, who is the guitarist for Radiohead, also does a ton of film scoring, string arrangements, and you can hear the arranging impact on Radiohead's music that has, inevitably drawn in a bunch of jazz artists. And I think there's a reason for that. And getting in touch with more artists besides just someone like Radiohead. I think all jazz artists know who Radiohead is, but um, getting in touch with even more artists who do that sort of same thing. And I think that's a way of getting in touch with intuition, because you're not being influenced by some sort of external, way of sort of pigeonholing you into what you think you should sound like or what you think you should do. I think in school there's a lot of that, where it's a lot of like, I think you should sound this way, or I think you should play this, or I think you should, you know, convey this sound. It'll be successful for you. That's something I got a lot, and I'm not sure if it has to do with me being a woman or not, but just I think you should sound this way. I think this will be really good for your career. And it's actually like you don't actually know what's best for me. I know what's best for me. Like I will, I respect you as an elder, as a teacher, as someone who's been in the industry for a long time. But I'm also going to take what you say with a grain of salt and listen to, myself and what I know to be like true to myself. Because the truth is, teachers don't know what goes on inside your head. They haven't lived your experiences. They haven't lived your influences. They haven't lived, through the things that you've gone through. They don't know. And the sort of bottom line is like those are the things that are invaluable to you, and that inevitably make you who you are, and that is sort of the essence of like what you need to get in touch with as an artist. And it's something that no one can take away from you or tell you how to really convey but you.
That's a really important point, and I had a very similar perspective in grad school. I complained my entire way through grad school. I had some good experiences. I got Rodney Jones's book. I met him. That was awesome. My peers were great, but I'm sure they were fed up with my complaining, and a lot of the complaining was, why are they insisting that we learn this way? Why are they insisting that we, play this particular repertoire or this particular whatever? And it's not even like the tradition, so to it's not that, because my bag. I like swinging and I like tunes and whatever. It was more just like the mindset of like, if you want to do this other thing, that's not cool. And you used a term in my earlier question that I think speaks to this issue, which is genreless creation. So, what is genreless creation?
I think it's just uh, valuing and coming up with musical ideas just as they come and as you like them, and that it has nothing to do with a category or a genre. And honestly, genre exists, I think, as more of a marketing mechanism and as a way of maybe organizing music so that, oh, well, you can find similarities across genres. It's true. But, or, you're searching some new artists on Apple Music or something, and you want to, I don't know, find out some new artists in maybe a genre that you've typically been drawn to. Like, that does make sense. But if you create on the basis of genre, it's sort of, to me, it seems sort of backwards. I think it should come from like the inside out, not the outside in. I think to me that feels dishonest in a way that, you're writing based on some sort of external form of organization and not because of the things that you just fundamentally enjoy. And maybe it's true that, what you fundamentally enjoy does all fall into one single genre, but oftentimes I find that that's not the case
Right.
at all. So yeah, that's what I would, I guess, consider genreless creation, or just opening yourself to a number of influences. Again, what I said about, identifying artists you like and why and what techniques they use. You're oftentimes going to find that a lot of ideas you're drawn to are not specific to one genre or
Um, I want to get to your life in a second, but I have one more question on this topic, which is, suppose you were talking about this very subject to a high school aged musician
another.
who aspires to go to music school to pursue music as a career, and they value genreless creation or something like it.
Yeah.
How would you advise them to, let's say, prepare for an audition, or know what to expect and how to make a choice on what school to go to and these sorts of things? Um, is it a matter of, well, I'll let you go. I could see I cut you off there. Go
No, no,
for it.
no. Well, I was just thinking about like what drew me to the new school, and it had a lot to do with who I wanted to study with and how I could get there. So for me, it's less about what is the prestige of the school, what is, the general association with the school. I mean, honestly, if a lot of people look at associations with the new school, it's, there are, a number of few really successful, really talented artists that graduated from the new school, whether it's Robert Glasper, Brad Meldau, or whoever, Keon Harold. But that it has so much more to do with, not the school itself, but the people you're going to meet and work with while you're there. And for me, I mean, a lot of it also had to do with money, but I knew that if I go to the new school, I can study with whoever I want in New York. And that was just kind of what sold me on that. I had total agency and choice over who I wanted to study with. I wasn't limited to the selection of faculty that are at a specific school. Now, granted, if a school has a faculty member you're interested in working with, then you should go to that school with the intent of working with that person. Like, I I don't know, if you wanted to go to MSM and work with Kendrick Scott or someone like that, or Ingrid Jensen's taking over Stefan's spot. If you wanted to work with Ingrid Jensen really badly, you could go to that school and do that. If you wanted to work with Wynton Marsalis in jazz at Lincoln Center, you should go to Juilliard. That kind of thing. Um, so I think it's more about like who you want to study with, who you want to build a mentor relationship with, rather than like what does the school represent? What do other people think of the school? You should just go wherever, you know, you can find the person you want to study with the most. I'd say really that is the most important thing. Even kind of over location. I mean, granted, it's hard to beat New York, and there's certainly a reason why I wanted to go to New York. I think just the concentration of talent and drive and innovation is just so intense in New York, unlike anywhere else, unlike LA, unlike the Bay Area, in my opinion. Um, and granted, a lot of artists come from these places, but there's a reason why everyone gathers in New York or stays there for long periods of time. But when you're a student and you're still figuring stuff out, and you're still learning so much, I think you do have to put the learning aspect at the forefront. But you also want to make sure your learning aspect and you getting in touch with your voice has a lot to do with, uh, you know, who you're interested in and whose brain you want to pick, and what space is going to be safest for you to learn and grow in. I think that's a huge thing as well, and I think that's something that people underestimate, because a lot of people report sort of mildly traumatic experiences at music colleges because they didn't really feel like they were in a safe place to learn. And I'm not saying that music school is always going to be hard. You're going to run into situations where you don't feel comfortable, where you don't feel safe. But at the same time, it's a very formative stage in your musicianship, and you should be somewhere where you feel like you can have a mentor who has your best interest in mind. or a space where the curriculum, will support you. And, I think that is really the most important thing to consider.
That is hugely important, and I think you're probably the first person so far who's brought that up. And I must say that that can be extreme and it can be mild, but even in a mild situation, which I think I experienced in grad school, it can weigh on you pretty heavily and it can affect your ability. Like for me, it was just the environment of the conservatory, right?
Yeah.
Literally the building of the it was a certain color, a certain dimness, a certain feeling to it just walking through the halls. And I knew kids who maybe for that reason, maybe any other reason, would drop out for depression reasons. And it's like this didn't happen at the new school, but the trade-off was there were certain faculty members and certain so I think that is an important consideration. Like, can you even live here? Can you get along with your peers? Can you yeah, so I appreciate you bringing that up. On that note, however, take us back. Tell us about baby Berliner. What was your early childhood like, and when did music come into it?
So I always grew up listening to music. Both my parents are fans of music, even though they're not professional musicians. My dad almost was. He was the bass player. I mean, he went to Columbia in New York for computer science, but he also played bass while he was there. Before the school got kind of uptight and very Ivy Leaguey. Columbia used to have like a skate ramp and like uh, I don't know, a bunch of things that they were just able to get away with in the 80s that they would not be able to get away with now. My dad would, play like shows on the steps outside of Columbia, and he played like, punk rock and, stuff like that. Maybe some more indie rock as he got older, but that was really like his focus in terms of playing bass, which was his instrument. And so he did that a lot in college, and he did it, once he moved out to the Bay Area. And he actually, I think there is one band he was with where they opened for Primus at the Fillmore in San
Wow,
Francisco, and he always names that as like the highlight of his music stuff.
that's
But
awesome.
I think it wasn't like his permanent calling, especially because he had gone to school to study something specific. But he still plays bass. He still plays music, drums, a number of things. He's always, exploring new artists, and he really, I feel like, is one of the people in my life who's really inspired me to explore genreless stuff and explore like he sort of just likes what he likes. It has nothing to do with genre. He's always investigating every single genre. He likes something from every single genre. He'll find, and he'll go down a rabbit hole on some new hip hop artist, or he'll go down like a free jazz, like knitting factory phase, which is like what he's doing right now.
Nice.
Cool. And some of these recordings I don't even know. So I'm like always learning from that. Anyways, it is to say, my mom is also a big music fan, and we grew up with a lot of music in the household, but it was sort of predominantly a lot of rock music, funk, hip hop kind of stuff. Sort of, yeah, in the general realm of that. And when my brother and I were younger, we did like an extracurricular music program called School of Rock, which, obviously we know School of Rock was a
Yep.
movie, and there is basically a franchise that's sort of a play on the movie, but it is real, where basically you sign up, and after school or on the weekends or something, you learn rock songs based on, it could be based on a genre, based on a theme, based on a single band. So like there may be like a Pink Floyd show or a Frank Zappa show, or like a maybe like a British punk show or something like that. So you get like the Clash and the Police, or I don't know, something like that. So um, that was a thing for my brother and I when we were younger, and for quite some time. So I played drums first, and my brother is a guitarist. He still plays guitar. That's what he does, and that was his first instrument. I guess he stuck with it. And so we were part of that program for a long time, and then basically I was really interested in music, but I did think I struggled with my relationship to the drums. I loved it, but I felt like it wasn't like the instrument for me. Like I couldn't see myself doing it long term. And maybe it was just because I don't I can't really explain it, but it just I think if I had stuck with drums, I may have not pursued music professionally, just because I loved music, and certainly a lot of things changed once I got into the melodic and harmonic side of things. But I think I wouldn't have found it if I had just stuck with the drums. Anyways, it's very serendipitous in the sense that I wanted to go to a performing arts high school and do music, and I auditioned on drums, but I mean, honestly, I think the audition wasn't super strong because they had like either a jazz or a classical program. I auditioned for the jazz program, and I didn't really know that much about jazz at the time, so I didn't have that much to go off of. And by chance, I had an older friend who's been a family friend of ours for a while. She's in my brother's class, and she's a drummer too. And she said, "You'll have a better chance of getting in if you play like a melodic instrument." So I learned a couple scales, and I took her glockenspiel to the audition.
Nice.
And after my drums, I was like, "Do you guys want to see me play a couple scales?" And they're like, "Oh, sure, why not?" And from there, they basically got the idea that I play the vibraphone. And I remember I recently came across my journal from that time, and I kept calling it a xylophone, just like everyone who doesn't know what a vibraphone is. And I was like, they really want me to play the xylophone. I don't really know how to play it, but like I guess I'll try it. It seems cool. I mean, it's sort of percussion, yet it's also an introduction to melody and harmony and stuff like that. And I think that's really what sealed the deal, because that's become a huge part of what I'm interested in now, is actually the melodic and harmonic aspect. I mean, as well as the rhythmic, but it's really all of those things together.
Yeah.
And I felt like once I started on the vibraphone that it felt like the instrument for me. And I really grew up with that instrument. Like I grew into my teenagehood with that instrument. I went through a lot, and that was always a consistent factor in my life. And I practiced a lot, and I really grew with that instrument. I practiced a lot more with vibraphone than I ever did with drums when I was younger. Um, and I just really grew to love it, and it was like a part of me, really. So I knew that like this is like what I wanted to do. I knew it was going to be really hard, but there was always just like no matter how hard it got, I'd always return to the instrument. I'd always love it, and it just felt like what I was supposed to do. It's kind of just something you feel and and so that's kind of how I got into jazz and how I got into vibraphone. And then from there, I'd audition for certain music programs, or you know SF Jazz High School All Stars, stuff like that. I never got into Grammy band, but that's fine. It certainly hasn't affected me today. And I auditioned for colleges from there, and then I always wanted to go to the new school. I really liked the new school. Um, I liked that it was more small ensemble based. I mean, I think MSM is kind of like that too, but I didn't. I liked playing in big bands, but I didn't want it to be the focus. I always saw myself leading smaller groups.
Yeah.
Now not so much. I'm interested in actually larger orchestration, but I think that's because I want to write a lot of the orchestration. I don't just want to play it. I mean, again, yeah, I'm open to a lot of things now, but at the time, I was focused on more small ensemble stuff. And I know the new school offered that, and I could sell you with Stefan. And around that time, when I was a senior in high school, I'd met Ambrose, and he put in a recommendation for me to Stefan, and that's how that all happened. And it just felt like it was really falling into place. I wanted to move to New York since I was like 12, before I even decided that I really wanted to do music professionally. And it just seemed like the right thing. They offered me a really great scholarship, and then I moved to New York, and that's five years later, here I am.
When did you develop the writing bug?
The what?
When did you develop a desire to compose?
I think I was always interested in like how to how do artists come up with the ideas that they do, or how do they, develop the certain ideas that they do. I was always curious about it. I think I just felt like I couldn't do it. I didn't have the tools or the resources. And I think once I started learning more about not just, whatever standard jazz harmony you can learn from like any sort of jazz teacher, but, alternate approaches and methods and theories, and, what have people done across genres again, like, how does a rock, composer, a true rock composer, differ from, a jazz composer from an alternative composer, and, what sort of sonic possibilities could there be. I think I was always interested in, how do we organize sound. I always like to be in control of that, actually. um, I like playing other people's stuff, no doubt, and I learn so much from it, but I also do like, writing my own stuff and being in control of my own sort of sonic organization, if you will. So, but I think that started to come once I was more comfortable with performance. And then I realized, that I really felt like people would know me for both my playing and my writing. I felt like that was just who I was and what would, make me unique on the instrument. So I think that really came in college, though, that I knew I really wanted to compose a lot more. Because I think I was really focused on performance and just becoming a better player in high school. And I didn't really think I was a good enough composer. I always just felt like it was intimidating or like daunting, like I know some kids who would, win downbeat awards when they're in high school for composition or arrangement. I just felt like, oh, I can't do that. Like, I don't really know how to do that. I don't have the tools or the resources. It's not for me. But the truth is that I always did kind of secretly want to do it. And now I'm sort of, you know, delving into that. And in the same way that, you challenge yourself on the instrument, I challenge myself compositionally. And that's why now I'm delving into larger instrumentation and learning how to do that. And that's made me really happy. So.
And I guess, did you start doing that at New School?
Yeah. I said in college was really
Oh,
when
my fault. Sorry.
into that. And when I was playing with my band, and I found that like, oh, I needed to have more compositions to present. I can't just do covers all the time, or I can't do other
Right.
people's compositions. I have to bring more of my own. Oh, I sort of got, put into this position of being a band leader when I was like 19. I think a lot of vibraphonists find themselves in that scenario because of the nature of the instruments, just, a unique sound, and not everybody wants it. um, it's there's not that many people who play it, so I think a lot of vibraphonists become band leaders and composers, and so that sort of forced me also into the situation of writing more original music. And then eventually it's like, oh, I did it more and I want to get better at it, so I'm going to get
Right.
better at it.
Okay. And at New School, so maybe first of all, who were your private lesson teachers?
Yeah, I had quite a lot. So I did study with Stefan for some time. I studied with Chris Dingman for some time as well. He's also a vibraphonist. I took away a lot of like polyrhythmic stuff and solo vibraphone performance stuff from him. So that was really super useful because I did get, quite a lot of mileage out of that. And solo stuff is stuff I've worked on since high school. Actually, I started with four mallets, so it's really what I'm familiar with. But it's a different realm when you have to think about solo performances. I'm sure you can relate to on guitar. You have to voice things a certain way. You have to be the rhythm section and you know and the melody. You have to solo and comp for yourself, or you have to find ways to at least create the illusion that that's what's happening. So it's a whole a whole different realm of performance, and he really helped me to sort of tap into that, and especially from a compositional standpoint, because I'd done a bunch of arrangements, or you can sight read any sort of solo piece, and there are plenty of those on the vibraphone. You can go on Steve Weiss. There's pages and pages of people's compositions on solo vibraphone, or arrangements, transcriptions that you can just learn. But it's another thing to like write your own solo piece on the instrument, and it's a very tricky skill. So I did that with Chris Dingman quite a lot. like, who else did I study with? I did study with Dan Weiss in my last year, and we're
Cool.
still friends and stuff like that. And when I was really getting into a bunch of odd meter stuff, and how do we get comfortable playing over, I don't know, 11/8 to the point where we're not just separating it into groups of twos and threes and things
Right.
like that, but maybe playing over the bar line. How do we make this natural? How do we make polyrhythms and stuff like that natural without seeming like calculated, or you know and without sort of losing your place in the music? How do you make it just feel as natural as 4/4, that kind of thing. I worked on a lot with him, and he's also done a bunch of work with tabla, and so we did learn some of that stuff. And um, I did work with Vijay Iyer for, I think, like 2 or 3 lessons, and that was super helpful. We did focus on composition for that, and his sort of compositional um, approach is very different from that of other teachers I had studied with. So that was really useful. And I studied with a vibraphonist named Christos Rafaelides for a couple of lessons. He's also great, and he focuses on four mallet, a lot of trio, duo performances. Again, that's a totally different realm from like, a quintet or something like that. You really do have to carry it a lot more, as again, you probably identify with as a guitarist. Um, so it's great to just delve into that skill. And yet he shared a very similar perspective to me in terms of taking a grain of salt from every person that you're influenced by, but ultimately it's your sound, and you sort of find what works for you and what doesn't. You take what you learn, what aspects you want to keep, what aspects are less relevant to you, and sort of make it work for yourself. And that was really helpful to get from him. And he also introduced me to a lot of like simultaneous mallet station and vibraphone performance. He tends to play them at the same time, which is something I normally played the mallet station, which is like a MIDI controller vibraphone, basically. I would normally play that and vibraphones separately, but
Mm.
it was very interesting to see him play them at the same time, and also in a live setting, and to like make loops out of whatever he might be doing on the instrument. He'd change patches in the middle of it, and that kind of stuff was really inspiring, and felt like very progressive in terms of the vibraphone world. So that was really helpful. And I think that was everyone in terms of private lessons. Yeah.
And do any teachers, private lesson or otherwise, stand out as positive, noteworthy in what they contributed to you? Obviously, I've talked about this with many people, and I know you have strong thoughts. There are plenty of bad educators, right? But I'm curious in what constitutes a great educator. And I'm sure you have strong thoughts on that as well. Like, who are the people who you just look to as like that's what it is. That's the model of what a teacher should be.
I mean, I always talk about Stefan. It's not just because he is a great teacher, and I think he has a very novel approach to sort of jazz curriculum and jazz harmony in particular, but because he always has the best interest of the students in mind. Like sometimes teachers let their own personal problems get in the way of, what a student may really need or really want. Um, and Stefan had a way of being really honest with me, but only because he wanted me to be better, and he believed in me, and he said, if you want to be serious about this, you have to do this, and you have to really focus on this, get better at this. And it's like he wanted, it was only for the reason that he wanted me to become a better musician. He had no intent of like putting me down or making me feel bad or inferior. Like, you'd be surprised how many teachers get intimidated by stuff like that and act out of very selfish reasons like that, or maybe they feel their ego is threatened. Like for Stefan, it wasn't about that. It was more about, I just want you to be a better musician, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to get you there. And whatever it takes based on what you feel like your voice is in the music. He he never tried to tell me, I need you to sound like Bobby Hutcherson, or I need you to sound like Lionel Hampton. He's like, I want you to sound like you, but you have to put in, the work in certain areas more than others. And you really need to work on this, right away, if you really want to make it and be successful. And that kind of stuff was very effective because it felt like, he was really honoring my musicianship and my voice while at the same time really pushing me. And sometimes I felt like there were teachers who didn't have my own voice in mind. They just were preoccupied with having me sound like someone who's already existed, or someone, who has already, done the things that they've told me they want to hear from me. And that stuff really bothered me. So I always do reference Stefan. And again, I was sort of talking about how Christos Rafaelides was also similar. Honestly, all of my private lessons were really like that. So, I'd say kudos to all of them. They were
Right.
great. I'd also say, Matt Wilson, who you also worked with. Not only is he a great guy, but he just cares about the music so much, and he'll put us on gigs or opportunities, which is really great. He's a positive, influence, and he'll play with us. He doesn't like the sort of teacher student barrier. He's very much like trying to, it's almost like equalize the playing field, or just make it so that we're all, comfortable. We can play with him, and we can, while also learning from him. It's not like a superiority thing. It's just, us playing and learning music together. And I really do like that approach as well. It's different. Um, and then I also, in my last year, there was a new class that was introduced called New York City Composers, where we focused on, contemporary compositions by, current New York jazz artists, basically, which was awesome because I felt like, that was a way to challenge the sort of traditional curriculum or traditional repertoire that we normally, put into jazz school. And Neerfelder was a great teacher. I forgot. I took like a couple of lessons with him. I brought my compositions to him, and I just said, I
Cool.
really like your album. It's also a great example of something that feels very genreless. So, I'm curious, how you came up with this, or how you think about this. And a lot of his stuff is also not super, at least, it seemed to me, isn't super calculated. A lot of it is about intuition, is about just subtleties of more or less, of density or less density, things like that, that really impacted me. But he also, if he thought we could do better as musicians, he would tell us. And it was because he thought we could be better, and he wants us to be better musicians. It's not because he wants to be an asshole or anything. It's just, when teachers really put, wanting the musicianship to be better and wanting everyone's voices to be stronger for whatever they are, that those make the best teachers. So I would say those were some of my favorites for sure.
I would love to hear you play duo with him. I think that would be sick.
Wow. Yeah, that would be
And I
cool.
love the strat. That's like so killing.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. He does. He's very strat vibe. That does make
cool.
sense. Yeah.
Um, okay, and then the next few things I want to talk to you about. How did these uh, affiliations, let's say, with Tyshawn and Nicholas Payton come about? I think those are two very cool things that you've done, and and obviously it started while you were at New School, I take it, or maybe before.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, how did you develop those relationships and get to work with them?
Yeah. So I met Tyshawn through Banff, the program, that Banff International Workshop in Jazz and Creative Music. That's the full name, and it's it's commonly thought of as being spearheaded by Vijay, but it's really Vijay and Tyshawn, and it is a great program in terms of creative improvisationally based music, where it's not, not just for jazz musicians. It's for people who improvise in many different realms and many different approaches. And certainly, Vijay and Tyshawn brought that and their own experiences into the camp, in terms of, Tyshawn leads conduction when he's there, which is basically conducted improvisation. That's a very specific way of approaching it. And, it's certainly not taught in jazz schools. That is part of his experience in terms of learning how to compose and combine, sort of composition through composition and, conducted or organized improvisation as well. Um, Anyways, yeah, so I met him there and I did his conduction. And I always wanted to be a part of his group or his ensemble, but Vijay never assigned me to him. But it's okay. I was in Vijay's group for 1 week, which is great as well. Um, yeah, so I met him there, and he liked, that I played vibraphone and marimba, and he had liked my ideas, and he was writing sort of a new commission or something the next year at Banff, and he had actually had people in his group start playing his music, and in that year was Morgan and Nathan and Lex who were all playing it. And the music is pretty challenging, and here are these students who are just nailing this music and are enthusiastic and hungry to learn. And I think that's what draws a lot of older musicians into hiring young musicians for their band, because they're so enthusiastic and they will work hard and they're hungry to like delve into the music and learn a lot from these great artists. So I think Tyshawn was really drawn into that, and he liked what he heard from his group at Banff, which was the year after mine. And he had remembered, you know, he had remembered me from the year before, and we had always kind of stayed in touch. And he said, well, I think vibraphone would be really great for this project. Would you be interested, in doing this? We'll have a debut at the Kitchen in Manhattan. I have like a 3-day residency there. He also did something with like Marilyn Crispell that week, and maybe like one other thing I can't remember off the top of my head. But basically, that was the debut of the sextet, was when he was there at the Kitchen, and and he also brought Nick Dunstan in, and him and Nick had played trio with Tyshawn before, but Nick also met him at Banff basically the year before me. So we all kind of came from Banff at different years, but he had sort of cross-referenced people he wanted to keep in mind for future projects, and basically brought us all in for this project. And the first debut show was like a huge success. I mean, we sold out the Kitchen, and the show was almost 3 hours long. And none of us had ever experienced something like that in our lives, playing a concert that is just literally almost 3 hours long with no breaks, under the influence of Tyshawn, who has these very sprawling and challenging compositions that really do take you on a journey. It's like watching a long form film or something, where you just have no idea where it's going to go until you are in it. And it was just like one of the most transcendent and amazing things that I had ever experienced musically. And we all just knew, we all shared that feeling very deeply, and we all just knew like this is going to continue. And Tyshawn was super happy, and we just continued to rehearse and work on the music, and we're still going to do that once the pandemic is over. But
Good.
uh, you know yeah, we've recorded that album, we played a bunch more. We had that week at the Jazz Gallery before everyone went into lockdown.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
so that's how I met Tyshawn. I met Nicholas Payton. I think it was just like kind of through the scene, and he sort of knew my playing. He was following it for a while, and he had like a weekend at the Blue Note, and he had asked um, basically Manuel and I to come and play that weekend, and that was also really successful. And he was initially going to have us just for 2 days, and then the other 2 days he would just have like his quartet or his quintet. So he had Gerald Clayton, Ben Williams, and he had switched out a couple of drummers. So he had like Kojo Roney do one night, he had um, Anwar Marshall do one night, he had Mark Whitfield Jr. do one night, and Joe Dyson do, I think, one night. So it was definitely like a different approach and different experience, like based on whoever is in the band that night. But he ended up keeping us for another 2 days
Wow.
to basically continue to play, and that was an awesome learning experience. He would like he would tell me things on the bandstand, like even like corrections or things that he wanted me to do, or tell me to slow down, or he tell me to take my time, things like that. But I appreciated him being honest with me, because again, I do think that's that sort of attitude of, I believe in your musicianship and you're young and you still have a lot to learn. And so I want to help you with that, but only because I believe in you.
Right.
And, to this day, Nicholas Payton and I are still, friends and interacting with each other's music on a regular basis. I'm sure we will play again. And um, yeah, and it was just a really great experience that weekend and a really unique group. And I felt like I grew a lot even just from that weekend alone. Uh, so yeah, and
That's
a
awesome.
lot of connections have sort of happened where like people on the scene or you have mutual friends or something like that, or someone's like, oh, I've heard you play before on some offhand occasion, so we want to keep in touch, or and that's basically how I got like all the musicians for my second album, because it is it might be interesting to people to be like, oh well, how did Sasha meet like Marcus Gilmore and Bernice Earl Travis II and James. And granted, I met James Francis just like right when I moved to New York, and he was an early advocate of mine, and I really appreciate that. New School alumni, of course. But and or Jaleel Shaw, like I met all of those people like through the scene and through like them hearing me play, or I heard them play. We've known each other for a while, and I'd always wanted to play. And then it was like this group makes sense and it would be a great group. And I only have 4 days to create this album, 2 days for rehearsal, 2 days for recording. I know these are the musicians who can pull it off, who delve into a lot of different genres, a lot of different groups, a lot of different settings. They're down to learn all this music. They're all really nice people, you know yet they're not gonna like do any like crazy favors for me. Like they want this to be a good album and a strong album, and I want to represent them properly. And that's how this album came about. And hopefully we will play again in the album setting. Obviously, all of these musicians are very busy and have a ton of work. I'm the youngest one and I'm the newest one to the scene relatively, so uh, I recognize all of those things. But I definitely think, we have talked about playing with the exact album arrangement for at least a couple of shows. I would love to do a full tour, but again, they're busy, and considering that people like Marcus Gilmore play with Chick Corea, Pat Metheny, like all of the best musicians. James play with the Roots or Lauryn Hill, or any number of, also Chris Potter and Eric Harlan. So like I understand that, like, oh, in respect to that, I have a ton to learn, and I'm honored that they would even play on my album, make the time for me. But again, the idea is that hopefully we will play some live shows, and they are enthusiastic about the music and being a part of my project. This is a small label, so if they didn't want to make music with me genuinely, they had no reason to want to do that. you know like there's no like major financial incentive or anything like that. It was more like, we're happy to make this album happen for you. And and they knew Steve Mandel, who's the sort of co-owner of JMI, and he works with the Roots and Jimmy Fallon. So um, it was like good people, good connection, and we could make it happen. And again, just feeling lucky to learn from them. And one of those things that just happens where people in the scene, and eventually, after some years, it comes together, and you can finally make a recording or a band out of it. So
I can't wait to hear it. I mean, I knew that you had a record in the can that coming out to be determined, right? But I had no idea that that was the band.
yeah,
I don't know how I didn't know that, but I didn't know that. So that's like extremely cool. And I think when that does come out, people are going to be very excited about that one. Of course, your first album was Azalea in 2019, which I do know. I am very familiar with it. It was awesome. But there's even another album that predates that maybe you don't want to talk about.
I
But
know you're not
I
supposed to try and bring this up. I swear to God, I
am I not the first?
no, not at all. Like like WBGO and like JMI. Actually, like the other co-owner of JMI is like, do you still have this album? Can I get a hold of it? And I was like, no.
Well, I think you took it off YouTube, and I don't want to double
Yeah.
down if you're not interested, but I liked the record, and one of the things that was cool about it was songs, and you were singing, and it was just kind of a different aspect of your artistry. And so maybe instead of focusing on the album, the question might be, will we ever get anything like that again? Anything comparable to that in your future?
I mean, I'm never gonna say never, but my immediate thought is probably not. Only because, and that's a reason why I kind of took the album off of streaming platforms and everything. I mean, first of all, I was like 16 when I made this album, so it to me, I mean, not only does it feel very amateur, but it felt like I still didn't really know who I was. And at the
Hmm.
time, I felt like I didn't know enough about like modern jazz artists that I was really deeply inspired by. And I was having, again, the stuff that I was talking about in my masterclass, I was having trouble relating to a lot of the jazz music that I had been learning just because I knew I wanted to do something different with it and I didn't really know how. So I gravitated towards a lot of sort of alternative or R&B music at that time. Granted, now I'm interested in different stuff, and I just I got older and I learned more things, and my interests changed. I don't really have a desire to create like pop R&B music anymore, and I also am not great with singing publicly. Like even though I did record vocals on this, that it's not really my strong suit. I really want vibraphone to be like my main thing, and I do actually get quite nervous to sing on stage. I honestly I don't really like talking on stage very much either. I kind of just like playing. So I think it had a lot to do with that as well, where like I didn't want to be known as a singer because I didn't think I was strong enough. I still don't, and I get too nervous on stage to sing, and it is a real problem for me. And it's not a problem that I have a strong enough desire to resolve. Like I don't want to become a singer so bad that I'm willing to like work on that. I'd rather become a stronger composer and a vibraphonist. That is really what makes me happy now. So
Sure.
but anyways, yeah, they are songs, and at the time, I felt like I was sort of writing the music that I know. Again, my early compositional efforts were I had some jazz tunes and stuff like that, but I think I felt like those weren't strong enough, and then I felt like I don't know. I was speaking to a lot of influences I had at that time. I was a huge like Esperanza Spalding fan, and at that time, I was listening to like her self-titled album and Radio Music Society, where it had a lot of jazz arrangement and influence and stuff like that. But it, but it also was it had more of a commercial edge than I think some of her other work. And I think I was drawn to that at the time. So that's
What?
why I created that. But I don't anticipate I'll write music like that in the future. I'm sort of going the opposite direction, and even more so as I get older. I really feel like so.
Well, I think most people do think of you as a vibraphonist, and I hope I didn't,
No, 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 no.
step into uncharted waters there. But I'll tell you this: I heard it. I don't know how long it's been off YouTube, but however many years ago it was on YouTube, that was probably the last time I heard it. And one thing I appreciated about it was there were kind of glimmers of SB present. Like there was, and your openness to electronic music,
Yeah.
to I mean that album was like pop R&B, but it didn't feel commercial, you
Yeah,
know.
I think the commercial is a bit of a stretch. Yeah, granted, there were like two songs on there. There was one that's like in like a slow 5/4, I think, or seven, or I can't remember. And then there's another song that was a little more like you could see it having a little more of a contemporary jazz influence.
Yeah.
But there were two songs on there that leaned more commercial, I think. So yeah, no, I definitely think it's not too far of a stretch from like what I later came on to present, and I think there is a relationship between that album a little bit and Azalea. But now that I've written this it's really a third album, but I'm marketing it as my second, really. because I don't count albums I made in high school. Um, that this, that I really am kind of getting farther and farther away from that. And as much as I do use electronics, and I'm not, I don't limit myself to genre. That it's definitely, um, I don't know, it's going in a different direction. I think it's going in a more compositionally intensive direction. And a lot of these are songs, like you said, and there's a beauty in the sort of simplicity of just a song or a tune or something like that. But I think I've done that my whole life, and so I'm interested in doing other things. So I find myself going increasingly more in that direction as I get older.
Speaking of that, um, you're a blogger, and a blogger of some repute within our community. And I think I could be wrong, but I'd be willing to bet that the impulse to blog is the same impulse that motivates your composing, that motivates your whole artistic brand, if you will pardon the term, your whole artistic aesthetic, maybe is a better way to put it. Um, you know, I guess the question I want to ask you, Sasha, is what got you started blogging, and well, let's start there. I'm sure I'll have a follow up. What kind of was the impetus to start blogging?
So I've always been interested in writing, and I've always been a writer. I guess a lot of people don't know that much about me, but that's something I've maintained since high school, really, and maybe even a little bit before then. But I did in high school used to be a lot more academically focused than I am now, or certainly, I went to the new school and I went full fledged music and said, screw my classes a little bit, but I did graduate from the new school. I had to fill some extra credits. I graduated from the new school with a minor in nonfiction writing, and it's something I've always been interested in. A lot of artists are also writers, write their own autobiographies, stuff like that. I was always really drawn into, um, autobiography or personal essay formats, and especially, from musicians. Like I'd read like Patti Smith's autobiography or a number of artists' autobiographies where I was really touched by like what they had to say about their own experiences rather than like someone from the outside, which can be based a lot on recordings and prestige. But again, I talk about the certain things or experiences that only you can speak on behalf of because you are the only one who really went through them. That's something that no one else can really say for you. So I think I liked being in control of, you know, explaining those experiences that I've been through personally. So I think there's sort of that urgency. Plus, I've always liked writing. I think I like writing more than I like speaking. I mean, I do a lot of speaking, but I prefer to write. I think I don't know why I feel safer in that medium, and it's something that I did work on quite a lot from an academic perspective. So, I did used to write AP essays for school, and you know these sort of advanced English classes, and so I did do a lot of writing and a lot of writing sort of training and academic training, and it also felt like I shouldn't let that go to waste, and I am compelled to do it naturally. It's not because I think I should. The difference between writing and music is I don't actually get paid to write at all, so it's purely just based on how much time do I have and how much motivation do I have to put something out into the world and write about issues I care about or write about my own experiences. Or I've done a bit of music and art review. I've done a bit of socio-political commentary. Obviously, I have the open letter that I wrote when I was 18, and um, that was something that is sort of a combination of socio-political commentary as well as my own personal experience. And I think that's always a medium I've been drawn to, and I think I just wanted to have some way to sort of contextualize my music a little bit more. I've always, been interested in the way that, when you go to museums, that art is presented along with sort of a context to the artwork or a sort of historical, informing of the art, or maybe a comment from the artists themselves. And I felt like, a lot of my music kind of should have that as well, especially when it comes to instrumental music. you don't have any sort of words. It's all just based on, sonic development and interest. And sometimes I felt like, I wanted words or context to go along with, my music, or just even people's understanding of who I am. And so I think it kind of just comes from that place. And, then I sort of added, I had the ability to add a blog section to my website, and I figured, well, I'm already paying for a website, so I might as well, use it as a platform to also, continue writing and share it with the people who care about that side of me. Not everyone does, but more people than I thought, which is interesting. People once in a while, tell me like, "Oh, I read your recent post, or I read your recent blog thing, and this is so cool, and this gives me a whole new side of you, and please keep doing this, or I relate to this so much, and please keep writing." And that stuff really warms my heart, because again, I don't get the same kind of redemption from that I do from music or teaching. I don't get paid to do this. I don't, there's no tour, there's no book, there's no publishing deal, there's no anything like that. It's just me and my thoughts. Really.
Well, I had my last guest was Jasper Dudes, and same thing. I mentioned to him what I'll say to you now, which is I think our community is hungry for that. The vulnerable, honest, whether it be internal or external, reflection by the artist on the scene, so to speak, the political environs of our scene, as it were. The creative process, and I think I've thought about doing it. I'm not sure I really have the drive to do it like you do, or even frankly as much to say. But I think it's one of those things, especially now while we're all home, musicians want to hear from other musicians, you know.
Yeah, very
And
true.
I should add, there's poetry on your website as well, I mean, I think what I'm getting at with all of this is that as an artist, Sasha Berliner, you are a big picture person. It's not like some people I've had, and perhaps even myself. It's like, here's the lead sheet. That's what I do.
Yeah.
You know, which I love it. Right? I'm not knocking it at all. But you're like an artist in the truer sense of like, well, it's not just this one thing. It's whatever I'm trying to express. Do you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of the artists that I have been, so deeply inspired by sort of follow in that same realm. I mean, you talk about someone like Vijay, who is a writer himself as well, and graduated from Harvard, I think, with a physics degree or something. Or Jason Moran, who's done frequent exhibits and like visual art at, the Whitney, or, the Boston, whatever, Contemporary Art Museum. I forget the
Mm-hmm.
exact name for it, ICA or something. Um, and or certain people who have done sort of multimedia or interdisciplinary work. There's like a pianist named Kelly Moran, not related to Jason Moran, just as a preface there, but he she actually has like a player piano that will just play notes based on what she tells it to play, and she
Oh.
doesn't always even play it. And then she also does a lot with like visual projections, 360 like design projections that she collaborates with other artists on. That was something I was very interested in. um, Anyone who does sort of like larger scale like political works sort of in conjunction with their music, or maybe they have dancers or film scores, things like that have always interested me. So I think, yeah, you're right. I do think about this bigger picture sort of artist presentation, but it does ultimately stem from like, the experience of being a musician primarily, just finding new outlets to express that.
Yeah, and even when I reached out to you for this, you were like, "Yeah, I've been thinking about doing a podcast too." Like, I think you're just someone. I didn't mean to interrupt, but I think you really do have a foot in every door, a finger in every pie, and I think that's um, all for the better of the music. At the end of the day, maybe that's not even the point of it, but it does serve the music to have all those different avenues of creative expression, you know?
Yeah,
And so I
I
just want to commend you for that because I think in our age group, there really aren't enough people thinking in those terms. I think everybody's trying to learn the changes and play odd times and learn the repertoire and transcribe, and it's great. But no one, I shouldn't say no one, a lot of people, most people perhaps, don't want to pay to buy a ticket to see someone play all their transcriptions. You know, they want to hear someone who has something to say. And so it's refreshing, again, in our age group especially, to see someone who does take those things as seriously as you do. Couple more questions for you before I let you go. Sponsorship, Marimba One, Vater drumsticks. These are areas of my own thing that I haven't really explored, although I'm interested in. You might have seen on Instagram the other day, I was joking that it would be great if Guinness would sponsor me, Guinness beer. And I was sort of like half joking, but certainly, you know, I don't know, Diodario strings, you know, seems like everybody has a D'Angelico sponsorship. So like something like that would be very cool. And could you speak about how those relationships came about for you and advice for those like me who might want to pursue that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you'll have no problem getting that kind of thing. I think more than it's not even a question about are you good enough or, is your musicianship strong enough? It's more about kind of just knowing the right people. And that was something I spoke about in my master class the other day too, where it's just hold on to every connection, every opportunity, even if you don't think you're ready for it right now. And, sometimes it's okay to ask for what you want as well. So, um, I basically started with like a smaller endorsement from a smaller mallet company um, called Blue House Mallets. That was like my first sort of
I remember that. Yeah.
yeah. And basically, what happened with them is I'd ordered a pair of mallets from their website. I'd heard about them in high school because they're making this new carbon fiber mallet where it's supposed to be, a little stiffer than rattan, which is the typical material that the shafts of mallets are made from. And yet it's not as stiff as birch, which is usually used for marimba mallets. It doesn't have a lot of bend. So when it comes to a lot of the expression stuff that we hear in jazz vibraphone phrasing, you can't really get that from birch mallets. So it was sort of like a combination between the two. Rattan breaks down really quickly, and if you're strong enough, I know I've heard like Warren Wolf break his mallets before, and people will eventually break their mallets. I tend to the yarn starts to go on the top of my mallets. That's more the problem I come across, or sometimes the rattan starts chipping away. So I was interested in that, and I had ordered a pair of mallets from them, and I'd started sort of tagging them in my videos or just saying, oh, I'm using these mallets and I really like them. And I was just speaking from pure, like, I genuinely do like these mallets. I think this idea is cool. I'm going to express that. I'll tag them. They'll appreciate that. They're a small company, they're starting out. And, I want other people to know about this. It's just a very pure, there's no strings attached. I like these mallets and I want other people to know. And I think they had forgotten to ship a pair of my mallets, or maybe they were starting a new model or something, and I had noticed the yarn going kind of fast. Like the yarn was starting to split kind of fast, and so I'd emailed them and said, hey, I maybe there was an issue in this manufacturer of the mallet. Do you think you can send me another pair? And also, if you guys have any new models or something that you're interested in getting feedback on, or a lot of companies just do appreciate artists and repertoire stuff. Where, or sorry, I said artists and repertoire. I'm mixing that up with research and development, R&D, right? A and
Yep.
R&D, where they just want feedback from consumers, or just taking that essence. And I basically said, if you guys need someone to test any products or anything, I basically just went out on a whim and said, worst thing they can say is no, or we're not interested. But I already own a pair of their mallets, and I have a personal relationship with them. So I said, I'm willing to, help out here. And basically they were like, yeah, you know what, we've been actually following your playing. We'd be interested in having you as an artist. So we want to, yeah, so let's do that. We're about to launch our first artist program, and we'd like you to be a part of it. So that's how that started. And basically, that's what leveraged the offer with Vader, because Vader saw this and they said, oh, well, she's with another company, but they're smaller. And, Vader's been around a long time. And, they just from, a purely sort of professional standpoint, because the company is bigger, they can help me get more funding for master classes. They can help pitch more money in terms of helping me to do more of what I want to do. Whereas the Blue House deal was a lot more casual. It was more just, yeah, I get to make my custom model with them. They send me a pair of mallets, and I tag them in my videos, and that's kind of it. Which is great. It's great to get free stuff in general, but Vader does have a bigger platform, and in terms of just getting my music out there, and getting more money for master classes and things like that, that's basically why I changed to Vader. And it was because I had leveraged, or basically I'd had that original smaller deal to leverage a later bigger deal. And I think a lot of people do that. Could also be true for like labels. If you're with a smaller label and someone sees a bigger label, sees, oh, you're with a smaller label, we know that you're desirable, but we're a bigger company. We can get you more exposure. We can help you get paid more, paid
Right.
more for your work. It's not about selling out in the jazz industry, right? None of us are making that much money, but if we can get more exposure, if especially at a young age, we're going to take advantage of that. So basically that's how I got with Vader. And then Marimba One, I forget how I met the main guy from Marimba One, but I was actually really close to signing a deal with Musser, but they were taking a long time, and I just felt like I didn't. There wasn't really a good relationship with them, and I think at the time, Marimba One was more primarily like a classically oriented um, company. I mean, they are called Marimba One. They started with marimbas. They sort of tend to uh, cater to like marching band students, stuff like that, not like jazz artists or.
Stefan plays marimba, though.
Yeah, but no, I'm not sorry. I mean Marimba One, the company, not marimbas.
I got you. Oh, I see. Yeah, yeah.
Bobby Hutcherson played marimba for a long time. Yeah. So, but my friend who is in sort of the classical realm, who I'd met through Mallet Lab, where I teach over the summer, she said, I'm really happy with Marimba One. They have a new vibraphone out. They're really interested in you trying it, or I have one at my apartment if you want to try it. And I said, yeah, oh, I love this instrument. Sounds really beautiful. It's very contemporary, different from anything I've ever played. So, I reached out and told, you know, the guy from Marimba One. She gave me the contact and introduced us, and their relationship was a lot more personal and a lot more, positive. At least it seemed like they cared a little more intimately about my music and about what I had to offer. And they offered me a really incredible deal that it was just kind of impossible to turn down. And I was like, you know what, this is a company that's going to stick with me, that's going to be with me, that's, not just going to use me for clout or
Right.
anything, that they genuinely care about me, and they're trying to, support my musicianship as long as I, represent and play their product. Um, and basically that's how that started with Marimba One. And they've also been really great about helping me, get instruments across the U.S. Wherever I'm at,
That's
about
huge.
supporting my pickups and stuff like that, and electronic sort of contemporary variations to the vibraphone. They're very open and interested in putting that into development for their company. And in general, I just, I built a really positive personal relationship with the people at that company. And I was talking to, ex percussion teachers or ex, percussion advocates, people who had actually been in the industry, not just some sort of executive handling, orders. It's like people who had actually been in the percussion industry to some degree. So we have some sort of realm of, relatability. This is someone who knows a ton of percussion, educators across the U.S. And stuff like that. Like when I went to play at University of North Texas with Tyshawn, I actually got to meet the head guy from Marimba One, or the director of strategic planning, I think is the technical name, and he knows the head of the percussion department at UNT, and they know each other. And I also know him from Mallet Labs, so it was like a good sort of experience with all of us, and it just put that much more trust in the company itself. So, anyways, long story short, that's how I got connected with those two companies. But, yeah.
That's fantastic. All right, SB. I guess as a final question for you, I might ask, we're still in lockdowns, obviously, for the most part, although it seems like things are slowly moving in the right direction. Um, what would you advise either Gen Y jazz musicians or even Gen Z jazz musicians or high school aged people who are maybe not sure with what to do with their time? How should we spend the rest of quarantine? Should we be just shedding? Or I have a feeling there should be some more stuff in your view. What's the best thing for us to do?
I think all of that. I've personally been doing a lot of like mental and spiritual sort of reassessment and realigning, just because I felt like coming of school, out of new school, that I really needed that, and I kind of needed to get more in touch with that, especially if I was going to really start to delve into my vision and why should people care about me as a musician? How do I market that? How do I, communicate that to my audience? Stuff like that. And I just felt like there was some personal stuff I needed to take care of that I had sort of repressed a little bit when I was in college for one reason or another. Usually it was because I was too busy or, too stressed or something like that. But now I kind of had the time and the room to put in that work. And I was actually just talking to Dan Weiss about this. Like, mental health work is a shed in it of itself. You have to practice it, or else, it's not going to be there anymore. It's not just something you can learn and all of a sudden you're changed. Like, you have to constantly work on it. So there's a lot of that. I've been actually exercising a lot, so making sure that I'm, running, going on bike rides, and like working out and taking care of my body. I've been doing a lot of cooking, and I think a lot of that sort of self nurturing is really important as an artist. But certainly doing a lot of shedding and a lot of listening homework, where I'm just trying to listen to, a ton of new artists, catch up on, albums I've been meaning to check out, but maybe, I was too busy to check out at one time. So, just sort of taking advantage of the time that I have, and, spending a lot of time outside and reading books and stuff like that. Anything that I would do normally if I had more time. So, taking advantage of those things, but definitely a lot of self nurturing and self healing. It is kind of an isolated time. So, you know, use that to your advantage and use that to like really take care of yourself and what you want. And there's a book that talks a lot about solitude and the importance of solitude as an artist. It's called Letters to a Young Poet, and I would highly recommend it to anyone. It's a short read, and anything that's discussed in there, the importance of solitude and working on oneself and sitting with oneself as a way of getting more honest with yourself as a creator, I think is super important. And while we have the time to do that, I would recommend that.
So shed more 251 licks. Got it.
Yeah.
Um, awesome sticks. This has been really cool, and you've offered a lot of cool insight about, a huge variety of topics. So I think this is going to be an interview that a lot of people from different backgrounds are going to really like. So thank you for being here, and I'm glad you're well. I can't wait till we can like play again, let alone hang out. It's
Yeah.
it's just like nuts. So I'm looking forward to that, and I hope that comes sooner than later.
Me too. Yeah.
Alrighty, guys, take care. This has been Gen Y Jazz, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye.